Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talk Across America. I'm Doug Miles. Glad to be with you. We're coming to you live if you're with us on a Sunday evening. I'm from Sarasota, right here in Sarasota, Florida. Not from Sarasota, from New York originally, but we'll get into that maybe a little bit later on. But this show is called Talk Across America, where we invite people in all sorts of industries, ranging from show business to politics to authors, sports, and a lot of different things. But tonight we're featuring a broadcaster, a good friend of mine. We're going to talk a lot of broadcasting tonight. He's got some interesting projects coming up. We'll talk about his career in broadcasting as well. He's had a varied career in both television and radio, also as a writer and producer. So we'll get into that as well and kind of talk about some of our favorite broadcasters over the years. So I'd like to welcome to the program tonight. You see his picture up on the screen. A good friend of mine, Michael Manning, who is based out in the Arizona area near Phoenix, I believe. And Michael joined us by telephone tonight. Michael, good to talk with you. How are you?
Oh, hi. Nice to be on.
I should know, you're closest to Phoenix, right?
I am close to Phoenix, yes.
Yeah, I know you're not from there originally. You're from Cincinnati, so how does a Midwest guy wind up in Phoenix?
Well, I bounced around. I started in Cincinnati is in the south, the lower southwest part of Ohio, and I ended up in Dallas, Texas for a number of years, and that's really where my career started. And that's where most of it was spent. Went back to Ohio briefly, and I'm back now for the last 10 years in the Phoenix area. So it's nice to be out in the West, and the climate is absolutely beautiful in the wintertime. We're getting into some serious triple-digit temperatures now with the desert, the dry heat, and people have no idea. It can be raining and storming and even some snowfall back home, but out here it's just a different story altogether. It's very nice.
We were talking before we went on. I was out in Las Vegas last June for a week, and I couldn't believe. I knew it was going to be hot, but they had a record temperature. I think it was 118 at its highest when I was out there that week, and I couldn't believe it. I said, "How do you people live out here?" And you've been living out there almost 10 years, so you've accumulated, what should I say, acclimated to it quite well.
Well, yeah, you work out your thermostat quite a bit to keep the bills down. My bills are actually higher than my mother's, and she has a suburban home, and she can't believe what my electric bills are. And I'm very good when I leave. I shutter the place pretty good and raise the thermostat, but hot is hot, and no matter where you are out here. And you have to lather on a lot of SPF and wear SPF shirts sometimes, depending on what you'll be doing outside. But most people will go from their home early in the morning, get in their car, go to work, and they're in a building all day.
Right.
And it's really not that much of an issue for them. But for those who work outside, they confound me, because you really have to keep yourself hydrated, and you have no idea. You can't feel that you're becoming dehydrated. You just have to know or assume that you are, and then keep pushing fluids at all times. Yeah. And that's the best way to stay healthy.
That's good advice anywhere. I mean, we have our heat here in Florida, but not quite.
Oh yeah,
out like where you. But we won't get onto the weather. People don't want to hear about how hot it is. But let's talk about you and I met interestingly. You were just kind of walking down the street. I worked at a station here in Sarasota. Why don't you tell the story, Michael? How you came to walk into a radio station, and that's how we met.
But that was a lot of fun. I was in downtown Sarasota, and was visiting. And I was thinking about relocating there. I was taking a walk downtown, the downtown area. I was on the sidewalk, and it was pretty warm outside. And I was walking along, and there were some overhead speakers that had been broadcasting a show. And I thought, this sounds like a talk show. It's very familiar, because I'd been in the news talk format for a number of years. And I stopped and I looked around. I couldn't see anything. And then a few steps ahead of me, there's a window. And I looked in and I saw all of you there was Doug Miles and a few other people were sitting around having this casual chat over a cup of coffee. I don't know what the subject was, but I thought, this is fun. I'm going to go inside and see what I can find out about this. And that ultimately led to the program wrapping up, and then I was introduced to you. And then we sat down, and we had a nice conversation, and I think that was the beginning of our friendship. That was back in 2006.
I was going to say, it had to be at least 10, 12 years ago, so 2006 was the date. Right. Yeah, I remember you came in, I think you talked to our front desk person, and then when we got off the air, I guess we were doing the morning show then, and then we talked for a bit, and you told me you were in broadcasting. I think we invited you on the next day, didn't we, on the morning show with us?
That's right, but I was leaving, and so we, because of my travel and with your schedule, the way that we did it was once I returned to Ohio, I was in Ohio for a brief period of time, and then before moving out to Arizona later on. And we did it long distance.
We did a phone interview at that point, right?
Phone interview, yeah. And it was a lot of fun. We talked about all the peculiarities of where each of us were from, and so I gave you the rundown of Cincinnati, and we just had a good time. It was, but that was a fun show, and it was originating broadcasting, which I love because it's so scarce anymore. You don't see it. And I sure miss it. I wish we had more of that.
It was a fun station to work at. Turbulent as most stations are, but yeah, you're right. It was.
That's right.
At that time, we were on the main, literally called Main Street in Sarasota. It was a storefront building, and our studio, literally, people could look into the window and watch the broadcast, and then we put some speakers outside. That's how you heard it. So
very
10 feet either side of it, you heard the show, and. They eventually had to move out of there, but that was a fun place.
Oh, that was fun. It was a very small-scale version of 30 Rockefeller Plaza, I guess.
Yeah, right.
For
very small
for downtown Sarasota, but it was a lot of fun, and everybody was doing a round table, as I remember, and I sat. I was like a kid watching this, and I said, I've got to find out what this is all about. But that's how we came to know each other.
And
good memory.
We were just kind of making it up as we went along, because there was a bunch of people that were really thrown together. That station was off the air for a long time. I should say the frequency was, and then new ownership brought it back to life, and then we just decided, well, let's go as much local talk as we could. We had a couple of syndicated shows, but I'm glad the goal was to do a lot of local talk. We did a lot of that, and that's how we started over there.
That's right. Yeah, I remember you telling me that, and I thought that was a fascinating station with a lot of potential, but you see pockets of that throughout the United States, and I've always enjoyed that. That's one of the things I've lamented about television is that sometime after 1990 and going forward, we just saw such a decline in originating television. And if I were to put a marker at it, I would say, for me, I noticed as a kid that it began with PM Magazine right around that time.
Right.
And one of the beautiful things about that concept, and probably nobody listening has any idea what that program was, but it was a Westinghouse Group W production, and it was syndicated throughout the entire United States. It was a half-hour show that came, I believe, after the evening news, and it was topical. It was real easy going. It wasn't hard news at all. Some of the items turned out to be newsworthy, but what was nice about it was that if you were in Portland, Oregon, and there was a station in Minneapolis, St. Paul, you could share and exchange stories because you had a heads up as to what was coming up, who was going to be a guest, what the topic was going to be, and that sharing went on coast to coast, and it was always hosted by a guy and a gal. They were both co-hosts, and it did very, very well. And then after it went off the air, things changed for the worse. So we took a bit of a dive, and some of the more salacious gossip or tabloid shows came, and many of those are gone. And so it's like a moving target. broadcasting. It's just up and down, and it has its bumps, and it can get better. And it's one thing for sure. It's always like a changing current of a river. It's just at any given time. It just depends. Having said that, there's a lot of good broadcasting going on right now, and of course, Doug Miles is one example of that with Big Band Files and Book Talk and Sports Talk. I always enjoy going on your Facebook and trying to catch up a little bit with.
That's where we have to be now to promote ourselves. But I should say the station we were talking about was WSRQ. It was WIBQ at the time you came by, but just to give the call.
Oh, IBQ. That's right. Yes.
Changed to WSRQ, which is the airport call letters, SRQ for Sarasota. But yeah, getting back to your PM magazine, I remember that show growing up. I grew up in Long Island. Floral Park was the town just outside New York City, and yeah, that was I guess they called it access time, right? Right before prime time, around 7:30 every night.
Yeah.
5 nights a week, they would have that show, and it was kind of geared toward your market. I think they had some the stories that were everywhere, and then they had some local stories put in, right?
Yeah, that's right. What killed them, and this was entirely preventable, which is why it's such a sad story, was that the cost of production required that advertisers who were regional, and these were mom and pop shops, if you had a pizza parlor or whatever business you happen to have, the prices doubled and tripled, and nobody was able to afford it, and that just started killing off stations, a dozen here, a dozen there, and I think at the very end there were maybe 4 stations left in the whole country, and then they just folded it up. But that was really the last. I say it's a shame only because when you have originating television and it spawns other ideas, what's taken its place now, as the 2000s emerged, was cable. And one lady that I've always felt was responsible for, at least in my mind, for kicking down a door was Paige Davis and Trading Spaces. And I've read that she's back after quite a hiatus. She actually attended the same school that I attended. She graduated from Southern Methodist University about 5 years ahead of me. She was a drama major. I was on the complete other side of the campus as a psychology major. But if ever there was someone who was meant to be in the role of a host, she was it. She's a pretty girl. She's perky. She's upbeat, and she actually loved what she was doing. And you can't fake that, as you know, whether that's in radio or television. And it's authentic, and it came across. So I'm glad that they tried for some time. That franchise moved through, I think, 3 production companies. The current producers, though, made a very smart decision in reaching back and bringing her back into the fold. But I credit her with opening a lot of opportunities up for people like me to come along and try something new. And it may work, it may not, but you've got a shot where prior to that you only had traditional network television. And that was really a steep slope to try and climb.
Let's talk a little bit about your background, Michael. We mentioned you're from the Cincinnati area. And you went to SMU. You really didn't have a thought at that time to do broadcasting? Because you said you were a psychology major.
Well, my story is hilarious to me. I knew at the age of 11 that I wanted to do this, but among other things. But actually, I came out of the public relations ranks, and that allowed me access onto 41 radio and television public affairs programs. I don't think they're in existence anymore, but these were the programs that were on Sunday morning at 6 or 7 o'clock before anybody was up. And I believe that stations felt that they had some kind of obligation to give back to the community. That doesn't exist anymore because everything is so.
Back then. I don't know if that's still in place, but at least in radio or in some television, you had to have certain public affairs to keep your license.
A certain amount of time. That's right. Yeah. You see how things have changed? That's yeah. And
must have gone away.
Realistically. Well, that was not that long ago, historically speaking, but I was on a couple of nonprofit boards, one of them for 5 years, and then I moved on and became a member of an advisory board, and then serendipity entered the picture. I was asked, probably out of desperation, to host one of those boring public television pledge drives that all of us would like to turn off. I mean, they're so terrible. I had never been on television for a lengthy period of time. I had been on as a guest scores of times, but I've never been on for any length of time, anything lengthier than just, 5-10 minutes. And 30 seconds before airtime, the teleprompter failed, and I was told to wing it. So I began impersonating a local televangelist. I won't name who it was. He ended up in a federal prison, and he's back. And I believe he's in your state. I could be wrong. So I don't want to give that out. But our production crew had already been up 24 hours, and they were just beyond exhaustion. We were $4,000 behind in pledges. So I borrowed a page from David Letterman and began walking right up to the camera lens about a foot away, and then I'd walk back, and I ended up chastising the audience for not pledging at the lowest rung on the ladder. Back then was $5 an hour. And I asked myself, well, what can you buy for $5 an hour? Back then you could buy a mixed drink, and that's all I could think of. So I became dramatic, and I walked over to a life-size cutout that we had suspended from the ceiling of Fred Rogers, late Fred Rogers, and Big Bird of Sesame Street, and ended up shaming people to pledge. And my producer, I could just see her in my mind's eye right now. She was salaried. She was on staff. And I tried not to look over at her because she had her head in her lap. And I'm sure she was thinking, this is it. This is it. I'm going to be fired tomorrow morning because I brought this guy on. But the phone started ringing, and they rang off the hooks, and we got ourselves out of that rut. We exceeded our $4,000. But the biggest surprise came after I left the station the next day. And here's a name you're going to remember, Doug, Bob Banner.
Sure, yeah.
I found out that Bob Banner, he happened to be the associate producer of the Carol Burnett Show.
Oh, right.
And he was watching this play out, this whole scene play out from his hotel room. He was channel surfing. And Bob was a graduate of Southern Methodist University, where I later took night classes to finish my degree. And he was in town to produce a documentary on notable alumni from SMU. And if listeners may not know, if they don't know the name Bob Banner, I guess I would equate him to the Rick Rubin or Phil Spector of rock and roll. He was a guy who produced the AIDS benefit concert, That's What Friends Are For, and he preceded American Idol with the show you may remember, Star Search. Now, that's going back a while.
Oh, Ed McMahon, right?
But,
sure.
Yeah. Well, a few days later, he sent an intern to track me down. And the intern told me, Bob Banner sent me and he wants you to voice over his documentary. And I went in and met with him, and he said, I've never seen anything so funny in my life when it comes to pledge drives. He said, I was very curious, and I was wondering if you were going to come back after the commercials or not. And we had a good laugh over that. But he goes back to the very early days of television, 1948, and we lost him. We lost him in 2011. But he was a wonderful guy. He wasn't demanding, but he made it very clear what he wanted, and he wanted you to know your chops and to deliver what he needed. We had very few retakes on this project, but he gave me good experience, and I still have a letter to this day that he wrote to me, and he said something to the effect of that there was no coincidence in our meeting. He was very, very happy to make the association, and from that point on, I worked in Dallas-Fort Worth. I was an on-air personality and a news anchor, and I went into management 1 year before we deregulated, and then played a lead role with the turnaround team, and after that, I went off to the ABC Radio News Network for a few years, and then I went back to Cincinnati and became a helicopter reporter until 2004. So throughout the whole time, like you, I've been a journalist and been writing for 5 magazines covering the commercial aviation industry and interviewing CEOs. Actually, that's pretty exciting when you're doing it. It sounds boring, but if you're personality driven, that's a very interesting track to be on. But that's the story for me. I think that everybody has a different path, in whether they're in broadcasting or music or they're an actor. You look at what Kevin Bacon is doing right now. He's out touring with his brother Michael as the Bacon Brothers Band. There's Paige Davis, I had mentioned earlier. Singer Jessica Alba is an entrepreneur, and she started her own company of home products. So sometimes serendipity has a way of leading you into areas you just never would have expected.
Yeah. Michael Manning is our guest, broadcaster, writer, and producer. We'll get into his current project he's working on a little bit. This is Talk Across America. Welcome to the program. If you're just joining us, we're live on YouTube. We're doing this on Mother's Day evening on a Sunday night, but again, it'll be posted up there, so you may be watching this on the recorded broadcast later on. I want to get back to, I know you had mentioned there, and I know you did the helicopter reporting. That's kind of an art in itself. Growing up in New York, the helicopter reports every morning. The people that did a lot of them were actually doing the pilot themselves would do it. Some had the reporter next to them. You had a pilot with you, but that's not easy to do, that helicopter reporting, isn't it?
Well, let me tell you, I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I drove 88 miles a day round trip because I worked split shifts.
Oh, sure.
And at the time, I had a pilot who was just top notch. He had served in Vietnam, and I was selected out of 6 people. I didn't think I had a chance in the world of snagging this job. But the economy was very slow, and my talent agent said, "Look, I'll throw you a bone. I heard that they're actually auditioning for this, and why don't you just go and try it? It would be some income." And I would get up at 3 in the morning and be down at the airfield in downtown Cincinnati, which is Lincoln Airport. And I'd walk in at 4:30 in the morning, and then I would just wing it live over the phone with a meteorologist. And then just as soon as you were done at 5 minutes to the hour, you had to put on your parka because it was 6 degrees below zero, and you'd run outside in wintertime. And my pilot was already engaged and ready to go, and you ripped off your jacket, threw it in the back, got in, got strapped down, and put on the headphones, and off we went. We were on a really tight schedule, but it was a beautiful sight to be over the city at night with all the twinkling lights and so forth. The only time things ever became hairy was when we became involved with the Cincinnati police. It was a manhunt for a gunman, and we were asked, they saw us coming in at the end of the day for a landing, and they asked us to help them, and this was springtime, and thank goodness we were able to use our camera and locate the suspect, and he was taken without a shot.
Wow, you were doing a morning drive and then afternoon drive reports then.
That's right.
Yeah.
The afternoon drive bled into, that was only about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and that bled into the sunset. And just as the sun was going down, we would land, and that was it for a day. But then you would go home and wind up going to bed at 8 o'clock at night. So it really was a demanding schedule. And then your weekends were sort of back to normal as much as they could be. But what happened was that when my contract came up for renewal, I declined because I wanted to explore cable television. I felt that was a fledgling, exciting medium that really needed to be explored, and I wanted to do new projects. And not because of me, I think because of cost reasons, they got rid of the helicopter after 50 years. And the competitor station in town went out and leased a helicopter, which was a very smart thing to do. It's very costly. It's a high cost item. My friends in Dallas are on the ground now. Monty Cook and Laura Houston, they're very well known. And they're a married couple who do Dallas and Fort Worth, but they're broadcasting from the ground now. So it's a very expensive option for any radio or television station, with the cost of leasing the aircraft and aviation fuel and so forth. But I still say it's the best way to cover news. It's the best way to cover traffic, by all means. And those who have stayed with it, I think, have an advantage if you're able to do it and cover the cost. But it really is an expensive item.
Very high. I know New York had a couple of helicopter pilots, traffic reporters. There was a guy named Freddie Feldman that did it for many years, and another guy named Neil Bush. I think he did it for WCBS radio. So you got to know these guys, and your traffic reports. So it's, at that time, it was more important. I don't think it is now with cell phones and GPS. You really don't need it as much anymore.
That's
people
right.
Can see on their phone where traffic is.
Well, they have fixed cameras now, and we had 73 fixed cameras, but we still had helicopter reporting. And there were about 4 days where I was out of the year where I was grounded because of weather. What was nice about it was that we could because there were fatalities throughout the country. In fact, I think 2 years before I came along, my veteran pilot, his instructor was forced to take off in fog, and that ended tragically for him. He lost his life. He struck a hill. And from that moment forward, the decision was left to the pilot and myself. If I felt that it was dangerous and did not feel comfortable going up in the helicopter, we didn't go. If my pilot felt the same, we didn't go. And so there were very few of those mornings, but we also doubled our minimums. In other words, how high we were supposed to fly. If it was 500 feet over a highway, we doubled that to 1,000 feet, and we did the same thing over the city with tall skyscrapers and so forth. But everything worked out. It was an interesting experience, but it really was challenging to be up so early in the morning, and it threw your circadian rhythm off for sleep. So it was very demanding, but there's people all over the country are still doing it. There are pilots. You are right. There are pilots who fly the craft and report. I know in the Atlanta area, a friend of mine is doing that. But Cincinnati, by the way, had the distinction of having the very first police officer. His name was Art Mehring, and Art died quite young of cancer. His son is who I'm referring to in Art Mehring Jr. in the Atlanta market. He's an actual pilot, but Lieutenant Mehring was a Cincinnati police officer, the very first in the country who went to a helicopter and did traffic reporting. And they've actually, down by the sports stadium, Doug, they've actually named a street after him. So Art Mehring Way is in downtown Cincinnati. Just thought I'd throw that in. That was just kind of an interesting tidbit.
Michael Manning is our guest on Talk Across America, and as you said, you grew up in Cincinnati. I would imagine you were probably there when old Jerry Springer was mayor, right?
Yeah, I was.
Wasn't he also the newscaster?
Was, yeah.
Was he a newscaster after he was mayor or before?
That was such a long time ago, and I was a kid.
Yeah.
That's why I'm struggling here, and I'm struggling and laughing because he's a character. I believe you've met him. And,
he lives in Sarasota. I've never talked to him, but I've seen him a few times around town. But he lives down here. I just wondered if you had remembered watching him on TV growing up. But he was also the mayor, I know, and he got in trouble for doing something crazy. I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, he did.
But he's made a lot of money with that talk show. Give him credit for that.
Yeah, that was really interesting. How he went from as I recall, he was not happy in his role as you're right, he was a mayor, and he was a very flamboyant kind of guy.
Yeah.
He did get into trouble, some trouble, but he bounced back and was able to go on, I believe, to Chicago. And my understanding was that he lived out in Longboat Key, but maybe he's moved.
Yeah, one of the keys. I think it's one of the keys. I know he lives down here. Yeah, right.
One of the keys.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have no idea if the show is even in existence anymore. If it is, and he does make his way back to Chicago and he tapes those segments. But that really isn't my type of broadcasting. But but he certainly was someone that you wouldn't forget. But I was a kid when all of that took place. So I couldn't tell you if he was a mayor first or he became.
I know he was a newscaster, 6 and 11 o'clock news. I didn't know what the timeline was, but he was. I'm guessing he was a newscaster first, then he became the mayor, and then after the scandal, I think then he took some time off and somehow got into the talk show business. But
that's right. That's
we'll
right.
And maybe he'll come on and talk with us sometime. We'll have to see.
Oh, he would be an interesting guest for you, and I'll certainly be tuned in on that.
We tried to get him. We tried to get a hold of him. I think when we were at SRQ, but he traveled a lot, so we could never really pin him down. To get him in the station. But
I hope
the general manager met him and talked to him and said he'd be happy to come in, but we never got it working. Remember Jim Grady? He was our GM. I think you met him at the time.
I met him. I vaguely remember him, and my greatest regret is I never got to meet Robin.
Robin,
and,
yes. Robin Lynn.
You're co-host, I believe.
Co-host on a couple of different shows for a while. Yeah, really nice woman and very good looking. You can look her up on the internet.
Oh yes, she was.
Type in Robin Lynn, her picture will come up. But yes, we don't know whatever. We know she's working somewhere as a therapist somewhere, but we don't know exactly where. So I'm still trying to find out.
Boy. That sure is a change of career.
She disappeared from the radio business. But I always thought she would have been great doing news, somewhere.
Oh yeah.
She wanted to do that at one point, but she got practical and got a real job, so she got out of the business.
I guess that is practical. That's very practical, but I do keep up with what you're doing and all of the people that come your way. So I'd be very surprised if you couldn't get Jerry Springer.
I'll have to see
at some point.
Try and find out.
See if you can get him.
Yeah, love to have him on for talk for a half an hour or something on the air. It'd be great. Well, let's get back to what you're doing, Michael. Again, you said
right.
Cincinnati, and then Dallas. Before we get into your current project, you did work at a news network. How was that? I did some of that down here, Sun Radio Network, when I first came to Tampa, and that was an interesting experience. Wasn't the most financially sound network in the world, but what was your experience doing news for a network?
Well, I was with Westwood One Radio, which was CBS Radio, and I was in it. It doesn't mean a lot when you tell someone who knows nothing about broadcasting that you were in it when it was regulated, and then when it became deregulated, it was chaos.
Sure.
Because at that point, big conglomerates came into any given market, and they bought up radio stations, television stations, newspapers, outdoor billboard advertising companies, all in a bid to grab market share. And that really took the salaries that people were making on the air as talent and pushed them way down. That's just my view. That was my experience. But I had been with Westwood One and went over to the ABC radio news networks. That was interesting because Texas at that time, and it's completely different now, but Texas was very much what Arizona is today, which is a right-to-work state, which is to say non-union. And we had clauses in our contract, non-compete clauses, that if we were separated for any reason, that we couldn't go back on the air for 1 year. Whether it was television or radio, we were all known entities, as they say, known people. And evidently there was a midday purge, and our president and vice president had been fired, and there was a contract that was lost that unemployed 5 of us. And I came in about 2 hours, 2.5 hours later. It was early as usual for my shift, and I was informed that I had 4 days. and that was tough. So a friend of mine, Vic Cagle, who was with the NFL, he had graduated from Ohio State, played under Woody Hayes, and then he went on to the Cincinnati Bengals and ended his career with the Falcons and went to IBM and became a corporate trainer. And he said, "Don't go back to Cincinnati." We were both from there. He said, "I'll train you." And we worked together, training CEOs to give better presentations. And we would videotape them and critique them. And we would do this on weekends when we would gather a group of people and do it at a Holiday Inn. But I did that for a while, and then ended up going back. I lost my father and then went back home and remodeled my parents' house, sincerely believing I could do it in 6 months. And it took 3 years. But I wanted things to be nice for my mom, and so she's enjoying it. I had the help of my brothers and my nephew, and we got it done. And I came out here. But my experience, I think my best experience was at the ABC Radio News Network in Dallas in radio. I worked with some of the greatest people there. In television, it was limited, but the NBC station in Cincinnati was terrific. And when I get back there, I try to stop in and see my friends there, and that's WLW, and it's an NBC affiliated station, right. TV5. And Cherie Palelo is one of the best, not only a good buddy of mine, one of the best anchors in the country. But we were talking and out in the lobby, and a guy came running up from downstairs and said, "I remember you. I remember you as you were the helicopter guy." And so that was fun. We all had pictures taken, and it was just it's a very sweet city. It's a nice city, and but that was my experience. It's all competitive, but the nice people you never forget, and I stay in touch with everybody.
Did you ever work with a sportscaster? He used to work down here when I first moved to Tampa. Then he went back to Cincinnati. Ken Brew, did you know him?
I believe he retired.
And, I know he retired from. Yeah, I think he retired from the business. But I don't know if you might have known him up in Cincinnati or not.
No, because he was back. He was back at the station, and we of course were out at the airport.
Right.
But a funny story about that: I was in physical therapy for shoulder surgery, and on the recumbent bike next to me was a man that you'll remember as Ocho Cinco.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I had to have him repeat that 3 times for me to get it down. But I met Ocho Cinco, and he was still with the Bengals at the time, but he was here in Scottsdale undergoing physical therapy. We were at the same facility together, and he knew him, and he said he was a good guy.
Yeah.
But lost touch with him after that. I don't believe he's in football any longer.
Yeah, he did Cincinnati. He came to Tampa. St. Pete was the sportscaster when I moved down here, and then he went back maybe a year or two later and finished out his career up there. But I you mentioned WLW. I think maybe you might have run across him in your.
No, I never ran across him during any of the editorial meetings or anything like that. He must have been off somewhere else, right. Or maybe he was at home. Maybe the timing. I wasn't over there a lot. As I said, I was in a different location. So where I reported to work was a very different satellite post than where the anchors were. But we worked very closely with the anchors and the field producers and so forth. I just never had an opportunity to meet him.
Michael Manning's our guest on Talk Across America. I'm Doug Miles, and we're talking broadcasting tonight. And Michael, good friend, as we said, broadcaster himself, has done television, radio, and writing and producing. But let's, Michael, talk about what you're working on now. It's a great project. You and I have kind of chatted about it previously.
Oh, yeah.
But this is an opportunity now to kind of get it out there. I know you've been talking to some different people in the business. We won't mention any names because you never want to do that till it's written down in stone.
No.
Talk a little bit about what you're working on now. It's a great sounding project.
Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. It's called America's Best Neighbors, and this project originated actually in my mother's neighborhood. It's a very sweet story. What happened after I left television and decided to pursue opportunities in cable? There was a television program, and again, I'm not going to name the program. I believe it's even coming back. This was a program that had a truth or dare type of feel to it, and it was a series that was on the air, and there were kids who were, and by kids I mean under 21, and they were encouraged on camera to do what I thought were very dangerous stunts that could land them in the ER or worse. And I just couldn't believe that there was an audience for this, and I was shocked. And I'm not a prude by any means. I'm not a stick in the mud or a prude. If anyone that knows me will tell you that. But I just felt that it was depressing. And here we are, all the way fast forwarding to 2018, and say what you will, we're in a very dark news cycle. And I feel that there really are two aspects of how you feel at the end of the day from taking in television, any kind of television content. You either feel hopeful or you're going to feel despair. And the challenge that I set for myself was, how can I create a family-friendly program that has a cool factor to it? Not an easy thing to do. And the answer was literally landed at my feet. When my mother became widowed, there was a neighbor. We never knew who it was for 2 years. My brother figured it out. But there was a neighbor who would, in the wintertime when we got heavy snowfalls, my mother would call me up and say, "It's happened again." And what she was referring to was that somebody had shoveled her driveway and the sidewalk in her private walkway, and she never knew who did it. It was almost like a prank in reverse. And this went on and on and on, and she would try to get up at 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning. She never could catch who was doing it. And it turned out to be a neighbor that was about 5 doors up. And I went over and visited with him and embarrassed myself by trying to give him some money for all that he had done. And he really set me straight and said, "No, this is something my son and I do. We pick 5 people in the neighborhood who look like they could use some help. And I didn't know that was your mother, but she was one person. I have no idea to this day who the other 4 neighbors were. But the idea was that and I use this in the log line, that in every small town and large city in America, there's always someone who's willing to help another person who is less fortunate. And these are the stories of America's best neighbors. So you when you're outlining this, you have to outline a problem. Well, the problem is we're in a very dark news cycle, and hope is not at a high commodity right now. And there's a lot of stress and anxiety out there. And the solution that I proposed was to go into small towns and large cities where these incidents were taking place. And my feeling is that it's a lot more prevalent than we realize. It takes place quietly. Some of it is planned and some of it's spontaneous. But I felt that if we could shoot this in a documentary style and take a tour bus and go out on the road with a Spartan production crew, you have a team of drivers, a couple teams of drivers, and you would have, of course, a 3-camera setup, a camera 1, camera 2, and a wide angle. And then you would have your technicians for audio and sound. And I felt that if we could digitally edit any number of stories from between 300 to 700 miles from point to point, we could provide a cable or a traditional network with plenty of episodes. The pilot has not been shot. But what's attractive about this is that it's problem solving, and it targets teens who are 12 to 17. You've got your millennials, 25 to 34, your Generation X group, which is 35 to 49, and then the adults who are 50 to 64, and then what's called older adults who are 65 plus. And it's what Richard Branson would call a disruptor to traditional television viewing, because it's compelling storytelling, and the idea is that it keeps you stimulated with hope and optimism, and at the end of every episode, you have something to talk about. And if it leads to action, then people in their own neighborhoods will start saying, who in our neighborhood is having some difficulty, or there's some kind of trouble going on. And it may just take 2 people or 4 or 6 people to come together over a cup of coffee and sort of problem solve how to help them. And the biggest hurdle to clear is sponsorship. And when you've got 6 overlapping demographics, then every conceivable household and lifestyle product that's used by the target audience will ensure viability, as far as I'm concerned. You can look around your house, and everything from automobiles to clothing and furniture and products that you use every day. And those are the sponsors that I believe would want to get behind this. And if you promote it 3 months out and go back and say, well, back in 2003, as I did, I went back and looked at Extreme Makeover Home Edition straight out of the chute, and I realized that we have a far larger population right now in the United States, but they garnered over 10 million viewers on the night of their debut.
Right.
They did a very good job. It lasted at least a decade, I believe. But I think there's a lot of, I think this has legs to it, and I think that it's something that really is timely. I've not had one person come back to me and have any negative comment. On Facebook, I posted it, and the comments were basically, this is exactly what we need.
It was very good.
Yeah, so that's it. That was the idea. It doesn't mean that you can't watch whatever you want. Quite the opposite. It's just it gives you an alternative. You can still watch what you want, but this is a hopeful program that's very timely. And
you look now, Michael, and
I'll just
the shows that are coming back that are they're doing reboots of shows people were comfortable with years ago. I mean, the Roseanne show is getting a resurgence. Tim Allen's going to have his show come back. That was canceled a year ago because it had kind of more of a family feel to it. Other shows as well. I think people are starving for shows that everybody can watch. It's not embarrassing. So this is the type of show you're doing that would fit right into that.
Well, it would, because what you eliminate is you eliminate emotional and physical violence. You don't have any of that. You don't have the any of the. It's not NYPD Blue.
Right.
You're not watching something that's pushing the boundaries. You're watching something that's very safe. It's informative. It has a cool factor to it because of the travel element. You've got a bus, and you've got some very good people working as a team, going out and really excavating these stories and bringing them up, before the public. So it is reality TV, but it's unscripted, and it's shot with a documentary style, and I think it's very exciting. So you mentioned Roseanne. I think straight out of the chute they had, and of course this is a cold start, Doug, but they had 18 million viewers, I believe.
At least I think they said there was more with the people that record it and watch it later. But yeah, unbelievable. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very big project to undertake. One of the other shows that came back some time ago was Steve Hartman, and stepping in the shoes of the late Charles Kuralt with On the Road.
Oh, yeah,
and
right.
He's done a terrific job with that. What Charles did was travel on the back roads of America and find people who had unusual hobbies. And
right.
Steve has broadened that. And In fact, I shared on Facebook a story that he did about a little boy that went viral in Birmingham who was feeding the homeless. And Burger King saw that and got behind it. And the last time I looked, there was a campaign of $58,000 that had been raised to provide as many sandwiches as needed. And the young boy, he's 4 years old, his father is actually kicking it up a notch, and they're going to create a program for the homeless to have shelter and also skills training, which I think is wonderful. So anything is possible. You just have to bring across the vision to somebody. As Richard Branson is fond of saying, if you can do it on the back of an envelope, that and just present it. There's
what Abe Lincoln
really
did,
no.
Right? Wrote the Gettysburg Address in the back of an envelope. That's the story. So
Who is that?
Do it. Anybody can do it.
I didn't get that. Who was that?
Abe Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address in the back of an envelope. So yeah, that's all you need is the back of an envelope to start an idea.
Maybe that's where he got the idea. I don't know, but it sure makes a lot of sense. And
give out your website, Michael. We've got a few minutes left in the show, but give out any contact information you want that people that maybe watch this on the recorded edition.
Well,
it's going to be up in perpetuity on both of our channels. So give out any contact.
Oh,
information
nice.
You want.
If you go on YouTube, there's a space bar for a search, and if you type in my name, Michael Manning, plus America's Best Neighbors, it'll take you right to it.
Okay.
And the pitch is a little over 3 minutes. In fact, 6 weeks ago, I went ahead and had it re-edited, and so it's very current, and it gives you all the information in 3 minutes that you need. And as I said, the feedback that I've had is it's so timely. This is something that we really need in our country right now, and I think it would be wonderful if we could get a pilot and then go from there. One of the things that Betty White, of all people, and I'm a big fan of hers, one of the things she said about television, Doug, is that you can have the best concept and the best people, the best cast, whatever the program is, but you never really know what the public is going to do with it until they grab a hold of it. So there is always that unknown. But I think that you can't blame people for really focusing on who are producing it on the sponsorship angle. But we have all those bases covered, and only time will tell. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. And again, we're going to have Michael on periodically with updates. And again, check that out on his YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you.
And Facebook as well. You're up there, right? They can just type in your name, get the information.
That's right.
As well, right?
That's right. I'm on Facebook, and on YouTube. I simply have the pitch on there right now. So I'm just taking this piecemeal and seeing what happens. But at least it's there for people to see.
I know you talked to some people pretty high up in the industry about it, and they liked it. So that's good news.
I have, yeah. I have, and again, it's just it's in abeyance right now, and that's why I have very little to tell you. But it's
I
think
well. I want to give people an opportunity to hear what it's about, because you hear about a lot of shows, and most of them you hear about it sound like kind of junky, but this is not. This is a good idea.
Like I say, it's a great idea, and it fosters hope. It leaves you feeling good at the end of a broadcast. At the end of an episode. And it's not anything you have to watch sequentially. It's something you can tune in any time and just say, I'm going to see where they go next and what they're going to do. But
you bring up a point there. On Netflix, you talked about Carol Burnett before, the Bob Banner. She's got a show on Netflix. I don't know if you have it, Michael, or heard about it. It's about Carol Burnett, and she produces this, and she's the host. A bunch of kids, and they have celebrities on, and people from the audience give out some problem they have, and the kids give their thoughts on it. It's very funny, but it's also kind of touching, family-oriented television, and it's doing really well from what I understand. So we need more shows like that.
I'm going to look that up. I just jotted that down. I had no idea she was involved with that.
Carol Burnett, A Little Bit of Help, something like that. I'm not sure if that's the full title, but just type in her and name, and it's really a very, very good show. Yeah, but kind of.
She's such a legend.
Oh, she's great. Yeah. In
Yeah.
her mid-80s. I mean, I'm not telling tales out of school. She looks great. Yeah.
She does look great. I didn't know she was. I didn't know what her age was.
It said
but
85. I mean, she said it herself. I'm not, giving away secrets. So yeah, but she looks great. Yeah.
oh, that's terrific. Well, it's funny because I learned that Bob was also responsible for getting the late Dinah Shore to blow a kiss at the end of her show.
Oh, was that his idea? Yeah, that was her trademark.
That was his idea. Yeah. So as I said, he was around from the very beginning, and he lived a very long life. But it was just one of those things to meet him and to work with him on one project, and it was a lot of fun.
She had her own talk show too for many years. People tend to forget. If you just saw the talk show in the '70s, Dinah Shore, but she was had, a great singing career, and then of course the variety show, but a talk show, and very very good one. It wasn't one of those junky ones. She did a good job with that.
Yeah. That's going back. I don't know when that
early
when
70s,
was
if
that?
I remember right. For about 10 years, I think she was on with the the
Oh, I
Dinah
see.
talk show.
Yeah.
So, great.
Yeah, I was able to meet two Hollywood legends outside of work, June Allison and Van Johnson, and they're both
you
gone.
Met them. Oh, great! I never got a chance to meet them.
Met them, and I had a 5-hour dinner with them at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Dallas. And all I did was sit there and listen, and it was like being in a movie.
Well, Van liked to talk. I've heard him on talk shows. He would just go on forever.
Well, he was also very funny. He had a great sense of humor.
He worked Broadway and of course movies, and great talent.
Oh yeah, he was. I believe he was considered the last of the great male actors of the golden age
of that
of
era,
television.
right? He was one of the
Yeah.
He worked into the 1960s in movies, and then he did theater after that. But yeah, did a lot of great. He could sing, he could dance, and do dramatic. I mean, he could do everything. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
and June Allison too. I mean, she did both. Great talent.
Well, June also had a show, and I don't remember it, but she did tell me about it.
Oh, she
did
series?
have
that. Yeah.
It was a short-lived. I believe it was short-lived. I don't want to talk out of term, but of course she did television commercials, and but she did have her own show for a while.
She sold a product on
Ojai.
TV that maybe not the greatest. I'm sure it's a healthy product, but yeah, they kind of made fun of her. But yeah, she did have a great career.
She did, yeah, and she was married to David Ashrow, and as she was coming out of the elevator. We all had our suits and ties on, and we all stood up. And she walked out, and because Van's the only person who could have done this, but he said, "Oh, look, it's June with Dick Powell," and I wanted to just crawl under the table, but most people don't. Most people can look her up on Wikipedia and see. Dick Powell was a great producer who passed away. Was June's first husband.
He was very successful as a producer. You're right. He made a ton of money in syndicated television. Yeah.
Yeah, 5-star pictures. Yeah.
Well, she's been on several
I think he heard that
times, so
before.
I guess Van got a little confused.
Oh, you know what? He had done that joke so often that David Ashrow was a dentist who became an actor. He left to talk about a change. Yeah, talk about a change of. We were talking earlier about people who changed their careers, but he just looked at us and he rolled his eyes and waved it off like I've heard this 100 times. But I had never met them in my life, and I thought, oh, where am I going to go with this? What do I do? And you just
just sit there and listen.
You just smiled, and everything went well.
Great. Well, Michael, we're about out of time. We did our full hour. I was glad that we could do it.
Well, we'll
do another show, but we're going to wrap it up now.
Doug, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure as always.
And thank you for coming on. We're kind of experimenting. This is a show we've been doing on different formats, but we're doing it live on YouTube now. So we're going to try and bring back the era, as we talked about before, of Larry King, Tom Snyder doing the long form interview. And I appreciate you being our first long form guest.
Well, that's terrific. I don't know how I can top that. That's
well, get
that's
the
the ultimate
America's Best
compliment.
Neighbors going, because that's a great idea. And again, check out Michael on Facebook and on YouTube. Just type in Michael Manning and America's Best Neighbors, or just Michael Manning. I'm sure it'll come up, and you get more information. And anybody out there listening is interested, help get with Michael, get this thing going.
Yeah, you'll see my contact information, by the way, on the pitch, and it's given at the end. And so any serious inquiries, people can contact me that way.
Great, Michael Manning, great talking with you. Thanks for joining us. We'll definitely
keep in
Doug,
touch,
and we'll do it again.
Sounds great.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again real soon.
Okay, bye-bye.